At the stage, Shen Xiang stood opposite to Shen Xiang. Shen Xiang, with folded hands in confidence and arrogance, said, "He'll play with the protagonist." Haughtily smiling, added, "The protagonist had to bet on something worthy, if in case the protagonist loses." The protagonist's father, Shen Tianhu, resting his hand on Shen Xiang's shoulder, answered, "If the protagonist loses, he, Shen Tianhu, shall withdraw from the patriarchal competition." The protagonist's father, Shen Tianhu, at the same time placing his hope on his son, thinking that since the bet was accepted with confidence by his son, Shen Xiang, he ought to have something up his sleeves to win. Shen Xiang, slyly smiling, appreciated his father, Shen Tianhu, with thanks. Shen Xiang, turning towards his uncle Shen Xiang, stretched his open palm towards his uncle and asked if the bet he placed was good enough. Shen Xiang, sneering, confessed that he was happy to have one less opponent, as he was confident that the protagonist will lose the bet. Shen Xiang, smirking, then proceeded. Flames covered his entire body. It looked like he was in the middle of a big fire. The crowd, who had gathered to watch the competition for the position of patriarch, murmured and whispered among themselves. Some, witnessing the scene, pondered if Shen Xiang could really refine the pills. Others disagreed, as unless he was a genius among geniuses, it was impossible to refine a pill without the guidance of a master. As the news were widely known, at the Spirit Dan Pavilion Masters, announcement to all the alchemists to not teach alchemy to the protagonist. Shen Xiang, fully concentrating, inside the blazing furnace, both palms stretched open and directing towards the small cauldron, felt every change in heat and also felt his true fire chi dancing at his fingertip. Shen Xiang, reflecting at his training, came to a realization that it was not in vain to be smashed by those three cock-looking alike birds for 7 days and 7 nights. The cultivation in the divine realm was proving to be really effective. Meanwhile, inside the space ring, Bai Yuyu, looking at the protagonist's meticulous approach in refining the pill, asked Su Meo the time duration she took to complete and pass the trail in the divine cultivation realm. Su Meo, while glancing at a pill she held within her finger, couldn't remember whether it was 10 days or 15 days, and also reasoning that it was long way back and it was impossible to recollect such a thing from long time back. Bai Yuyu, with teasing gesture, concluded that the protagonist was more talented than her. Su Meo, childishly revolted, and argued that she didn't even have a master back then, and the protagonist was able to perform such feats, as she had been carefully guiding the protagonist in every steps. Su Meo, with her chin resting on her hand, thoughtfully agreed. In conclusion, stated the protagonist had a bright future. Inside, the blazing furnace surrounded the cauldron. The protagonist commanded the cauldron to open, with his hand raised and finger pointed upwards. As the cauldron opened, the aftermath shocked the onlookers, including Shen Tianhu, the protagonist's father, Shen Xiang, an 8th level of mortal martial realm and the commander of Shen family branch, who was also the father of Shen Jinhua, and Shen Xiang, a 7th level of mortal martial realm and Shen Hao's brother, leaving them shocked with their mouth open. The protagonist, in beaming confidence, pills flowing in the air, and his hands stretched to catch them, asked everyone to check the authenticity of the pill. 2 of the elders examined the pill. One remarked that the body-tempering pill the protagonist refined was rarer and purer than the ones produced by the Spirit Dan Pavilion, while the other exclaimed in happiness that the protagonist's strength had already exceeded a top-grade spiritual vein. Shen Xiang, unable to make sense of the situation and also not being able to accept the result, retorted that the protagonist must have cheated. The protagonist, with his hand placed supporting his chin, looking as if he knew something secretive, responded to his uncle that he had heard some interesting thing from his subordinates recently, that his uncle had a weak yang qi and was weak in certain aspects, nonchalantly teasing while smiling. In other words, a yang deficiency. Shen Xiang stood irritated. Shen Xiang tossed a pill to Shen Xiang, adding he was concerned with his uncle's health and recommending him to try his pill. Shen Xiang, irritated and shaking with anger, told the protagonist not to cross the limits. The crowds bustled with noises exclaiming, Shen Xiang could really refine pills, and also some claiming that the Shen family now had an alchemist. Shen Jinhua stood behind the murmuring crowd in jealousy and pale face. Someone in the crowd also commented that the Shen's family key training target should also be changed. The other nodded, as producing an alchemist within a family was an achievement for the family's name, and the family was bound to become famous or even the greatest in the Wohu city. Shen Zhanhu, angry and furiously, exclaimed that he wouldn't allow the change to happen. Shen Jinhua jumped and approached Shen Xiang, accusing the protagonist of being complacent. Shen Xiang, with irritation, reprimanded and asked if Shen Jinhua had forgotten his loss at the Spirit Dan Pavilion. Shen Jinhua haughtily scorned and pulled out an axe, asking if the protagonist was tough as then, and if he could now resist against his strikes. As Shen Jinhua leaped to attack Shen Xiang, the protagonist recognized the axe. It was Tianyang's slashing axe. The protagonist, while avoiding the blow, wondered how Shen Jinhua's qi attack became so fierce, as Shen Jin's qi earlier was weak. The attack exploded, huge burst of smoke and qi energy rose. The protagonist, coughing, appeared. From the smoke, he was able to dodge the attack. Shen Jinhua, standing, resting the axe on his shoulder, proclaimed that the axe was worthy of its power, praising the axe for releasing such a force after a single swing attack. After all, the axe attack was of spiritual level technique. The protagonist's father, Shen Tianhu, bewildered and worried at the scene and observing the weapon Tianyang's slashing axe as a spiritual level technique of the Shen's family, but was awarded to the only family members who had made great contributions. Turning towards the elders in anger, asked who had given it to Shen Jinhua, mentioning it was against the rules and principality of the Shen family. Shen Xiang, smiling, pointed out that Shen Jinhua had already cultivated and pursuing the matter would not prove any point, and with laughter advised a worried Shen Tianhu to relax and observe if Shen Jinhua will be able to grab the opportunity or his son overcoming the hurdle. At the stage, Shen Jinhua took every opportunity to attack Shen Xiang. While Shen Xiang evading every attack, Shen Xiang saw an opening at the back of Shen Jinhua. The protagonist, with qi in his fist, Azure Dragon Fist, ran towards the back of his opponent to attack. As the protagonist drew close, Shen Jinhua wickedly smiled and exclaimed he had revealed opening on purpose, then with a shout to look at his axe, struck towards the protagonist. Shen Xian, though, tried to evade the attack, seemed to have sustained an injury from the attack. Shen Xiang, reflecting, reiterated that he had underestimated him, and it seemed impossible to attack him from such a range, and hoping only if he could find a chance he could knock him down with just one move. Su Meo, seeming to observe and know the situation and thoughts of the protagonist, suggested that the protagonist should create a chance for opening if he was unable to find the chance. Leaving Shen Xiang temporarily dazzled, Su Meo reminded him of the incident at the Spirit Dan Pavilion, where a roar was sounded, bringing the fight between Shen Xian and Shen Jinhua to a halt. At the Dan Pavilion, the roar temporarily shook their consciousness. Shen Xian repeated, saying that the roar was indeed able to shock people's mind and heart. Su Meo added that was the kind of sound howling technique. It was similar to Azure Dragon Fist that the protagonist used. Su Meo then asked the protagonist to follow her instruction. Su Meo positioned herself standing and floating behind the protagonist. She was visible only to the protagonist, while the protagonist sat in mediating position. Su Meo then instructed him to lift the qi between his lips and teeth, while channeling his true qi, and imagine his qi bursting out of his mouth like a mountain torrent, hills collapsing and bursting out of his mouth. Shen Jinhua, unfazed and unaware at the situation happening with the protagonist, wildly ran towards the protagonist, to attack while mocking him, calling the protagonist a fool, and if the protagonist thought he had time to meditate, with a loud shout, telling the protagonist to go to hell, lifted the axe above Shen Xiang's head to strike. At the same time, a command was heard in the protagonist's mind to initiate the step now. As the axe neared the protagonist, a loud roar with the image of dragon appeared. The roar was directed towards Shen Xianghua. Shen Xianghua shocked and questioned if it was really a dragon, and was temporarily stunned. Onlookers from the crowds, including an elder and his own father, was shocked and awed. Shen Xianghua struck his own head with one hand, while the other hand held the axe. Recomposing and regretting that he was fooled by the protagonist, staring towards where the protagonist stood, questioned where the protagonist was. Shen Xiang seemed to have disappeared. Suddenly from his left side, the protagonist appeared with clenched fist, asking whether Shen Xianghua was looking for him. With a strong Azure Dragon fist attack knocked Shen Xianghua to the air. Shen Xianghua flew a few feet away while groaning loudly of the pain. Shen Xiang stood in confidence, the shadow of the dragon behind him positioned in ready-to-roar stance. Asked if Shen Xianghua was convinced.